For the purposes of our special guests, I will use the gavel today. Welcome everybody to the subcommittee meeting of Public Safety, Transportation, and Environment. We have all 4 members here on time, so we're going to get started. We have 3 budgets today: the Office of the Attorney General, Maryland Emergency Medical Systems Operations Fund, and DPSCS Administration and Offices, and we'll be going in that order. First up is the Attorney General. We have our friend Jacob with us for the analysis. Jacob, take it away.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Today we have the budget for the Office of the Attorney General, which in fiscal 2024 increases by $18.5 million, or about 31.6% to $77 million. We have some proposed deficiencies for fiscal 2023, 3 of them. We have $208,000 in general funds to fund an independent audit of the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner. We have a $143,017 special fund increase to fund 2 new positions for Assistant Attorneys General focusing on enforcement in the Consumer Protection Division. And we have a $1.5 million reduction reflecting the transfer of general funds to the Department of Public Safety and Correctional Services to fund efforts by the U.S. Attorney to combat crime in Baltimore City. As shown in Exhibit 1, the fiscal 2024 allowance for OAG totals $77 million. The legal counsel and advice program occupies 37% of the total budget. The next largest programs are consumer protection and the Medicaid fraud control unit at 16% and 9% of the total allowance, respectively. Going to page 4, we have Exhibit 2, which discusses some of the larger changes in the budget this year. On the personnel side, we have funding for some new positions: 28 assistant attorneys general, 6 staff attorneys, 1 computer technician, and 22 administrative positions, including 19 contractual conversions. That totals about $4.9 million. We have increases to employee and retiree health insurance totaling about $992,000. And the annualization of the November 2022 4.5% cost of living adjustment, which comes out to about $430,000. Under the other changes towards the bottom of the page, we have funding for the Access to Counsel and Eviction Special Fund, which was included in Chapter 40 of 2022. This is $14 million of the $18.5 million increase. So that accounts for a significant chunk of the increase this year. And we'll cover the Access to Counsel and Evictions program a little later on in this analysis. We also have $375,000 in funding for the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner audit, and those are expenses for experts and staff. The Office of the Chief Medical Examiner audit funds have been allocated to OAG for an audit of the Office of the Chief Medical Examiner in both fiscal 2023 and 2024. Following the testimony of former Maryland Chief Medical Examiner Dr. David Fowler in the trial of former police officer Derek Chauvin in Minnesota, more than 400 medical experts signed a letter to the previous Attorney General calling for an investigation into OCME's practices for investigating in custody deaths under Dr. Fowler. The previous Attorney General ordered an audit as a result of this letter, and that audit is ongoing. Going to personnel data in the middle of page 5, we see that currently the Office of the Attorney General has a 14.4% vacancy rate, or 42.4 positions. This puts them about 21.5 positions over their necessary vacancies. The fiscal 2024 allowance reduces the number of contractual positions by 29 positions to accommodate the addition of 19 regular positions via conversion. The fiscal 2024 allowance provides for 57 new regular positions, including the Assistant Attorneys General mentioned previously. We have the 6 staff attorneys, the computer technician in criminal investigation, and 22 administrative positions in various divisions. OAG currently has vacant positions matching the new positions requested in all the divisions where new positions are being requested, with the exception of Educational Affairs. And OAG should comment on what is being done to fill these vacant positions and why the new positions are being requested when there are currently vacancies for similar positions. OAG's vacancy rate at 14.4% includes 15 positions which became vacant on or before December 31st, 2021. 4 of these positions are assistant attorneys general and 1 is a staff attorney position. OAG has attempted to remediate part of this issue by implementing a 1 salary grade increase for attorneys in the fiscal 2024 allowance. Going to page 7, we will find the first key observation in this analysis. The Independent Investigations Division completed its first year of operation this past year. The Independent Investigations Division within the Office of Attorney General was established in 2021 as per Chapter 132 of 2021. The division is tasked with investigating any police-involved death of a civilian in the state or any case with a likelihood of death. During IID's first 12 months of operation, 23 cases were investigated. Data including caseload projections for fiscal 2023 and 2024 may be found in Exhibit 3 on page 7. The estimates for fiscal 2023 and 2024 are based on the projections of a work group that was charged with creating the division that IID would investigate 30 to 40 qualifying cases in any given year. And the Department of Legislative Services recommends the adoption of committee narrative, requesting a report on the performance of IID in fiscal 2023. The report should include monthly data on the number of potential cases, the number of completed investigations, and outcomes. On page 8, we have the second key observation, which discusses the continued rollout of the Access to Counsel and Evictions program. Chapter 746 of 2021 established the ACE, or Access to Counsel and Evictions program, which provides a right to counsel in cases of evictions for qualifying individuals, along with the ACE Special Fund, both of which are administered by the Maryland Legal Services Corporation, MLSC. The same legislation also established the ACE Task Force, which is staffed by 15 members appointed by the Office of the Attorney General. Further, Chapter 685 of 2022 mandated that the judiciary compile data on evictions and share that data monthly with the Department of Housing and Community Development beginning January 1st, 2023. The rollout of the ACE program is a 3-year process with final implementation to be completed by October 1st, 2025. Per Chapter 40 of 2022, as previously mentioned, the ACE Special Fund is allocated $14 million in revenues diverted from the Unclaimed Property Fund. These funds are appropriated to MLSC via the Office of the Attorney General allowance in fiscal 2024. MLSC estimates that the cost of the program in fiscal 24 will be $18.65 million. A portion of the additional fiscal 24 expenses not covered by the appropriation in the Office of the Attorney General is expected to be covered by funds transferred to MLSC via a grant agreement, wherein the Department of Housing and Community Development agreed to transfer $5.4 million in funding from the Emergency Rental Assistance Program. Additionally, Chapters 20 and 21 of 2022 appropriate certain funds to the ACE Special Fund that are received from a final settlement agreement or judgment relating to certain investigations or enforcement actions. Funding is expected to be available for the ACE Special Fund from this source in fiscal 24, but the exact amount of funds has not yet been appropriated. Exhibit 4, which can be found on page 9, provides a full breakdown of the funding available and what is still needed to fund the Access to Counsel and Evictions program. So we see that fiscal 23 includes funding in the ACE Special Fund as well as Emergency Rental Assistance Program funds. Fiscal 24, there is still some funding needed, and fiscal 2025, there is no funding currently set for the program. Funding provided to date has been used to fund legal services grants to providers in the program, along with administrative costs and tenant outreach and education. The program has provided funding to 11 organizations in the first phase of the rollout. This first phase prioritizes funding in jurisdictions that have previously designated funds of their own to use in providing eviction prevention legal services in accordance with statute. In the first 2 quarters of fiscal 2023, these 11 organizations have received a combined total of approximately $6.6 million. As we see in Exhibit 5, which can be found on page 10, a little better to see. The Pro Bono Resource Center has received the most funding at approximately $1.8 million, followed by Maryland Legal Aid at $1.6 million. During the first 2 quarters of fiscal 2023, 1,508 tenants were provided with access to counsel via the program, with the highest number of recipients, 441, in Prince George's County. At the time this analysis was written, the MLSC did not have a projection for the number of cases in the remainder of fiscal 2023. A full listing of the counties where access to counsel and evictions was offered in the first 2 quarters of fiscal 2023 and the number of cases handled may be found in Exhibit 6 on page 11. The cases that were closed with help from the Access to Counsel and Evictions program had a variety of different results. Tenants received advice or counseling and may have declined full representation in 579 cases. Additionally, 380 tenants had their eviction delayed, which gave them time to find alternative housing. There were 1,519 benefits reported, and this discrepancy between the 1,508 tenants and the 1,519 benefits occurs because some providers report more than one benefit per case. A full breakdown of the types of dispositions may be found in Exhibit 7 on page 12. Now, the 1,508 cases displayed in Exhibit 6 and discussed in Exhibit 7 are only a fraction of the cases where help was sought in these 11 counties. In the first 2 quarters of fiscal 2023, 718 applicants were rejected from the program. The most common reason for rejection was a lack of resources, with 415 applicants being rejected for this reason. As the implementation process continues in fiscal 24, ACE plans to add more providers in order to lower the number of rejections. Data regarding the number of applicants rejected is illustrated in Exhibit 8 on page 13. MLSC also expects to begin gathering data on the desired outcomes of tenants, so those may be compared to the outcomes of cases in order to determine if the access to counsel is having the desired effect for tenants it serves. The Department of Legislative Services recommends the adoption of committee narrative requesting quarterly reports on the implementation of the ACE program in fiscal 2024. Moving ahead to page 14, we find key observation number 3, where we'll discuss the decrease in antitrust division investigations and that enforcement actions have remained stable. The Antitrust Division enforces the Maryland Antitrust Act to ensure that fair economic competition exists within the state. The Antitrust Division also represents the state in damage actions brought under federal and state antitrust statutes. In fiscal 2022, the Antitrust Division investigated or was involved with inquiries or advice in 224 cases. This represents a decrease of 163 cases from the prior year. However, enforcement actions remain stable from fiscal 2021, staying at a total of 38 cases. OAG did not report any funds recovered in fiscal 2022 as a result of antitrust enforcement actions, in contrast to fiscal 2021, where $363,117 was recovered for the state. Data showing antitrust investigations, inquiries, and advice, along with enforcement and funds recovered, may be found in Exhibit 9 in the middle of page 14. And the Office of the Attorney General should comment on what has caused the decrease in the number of investigations, inquiries, and advice given in cases. OAG should also comment on the lack of funds recovered in fiscal 2022. Moving to page 15, we'll find the 2 recommended operating budget actions for the Office of the Attorney General. The first is a narrative which is recommended to be adopted regarding the Independent Investigations Division, requesting a report to be submitted by October 1st of 2023, detailing the work of the division during fiscal 2023. The second are the quarterly reports for access to counsel and evictions, regarding the progress of the implementation of the ACE program during the 3-year rollout period. These reports will provide several different facts and figures to keep the committees alert of how the rollout is going. And with that, Madam Chair, that's all I have for you today, but I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much, Jacob. Before we get to questions, I neglected to introduce a couple special guests. Of course, we have the Attorney General with us. Thank you for being here. Behind me, you'll see news crew from ABC News. And then my intern, Elijah, is with us. He's a junior at Towson University, and he's joining us for the day. Okay, questions for the analyst. Senator Jackson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jacob, if you could look at page 7. On the key observations at the last sentence prior to pointing to Exhibit 3. So in fiscal 2022, the unit began 19 investigations out of 52 potential investigations. Data including projections for the caseload for 2023 and 2024 may be found in the graph. The graph has new and existing potential investigations and reports completed. So are we projecting, or are we talking about the potential? I guess as we move forward with these cases, could you explain those to us, please?
Sure. So the new and existing investigations are the investigations which are expected to come from potential cases. Potential cases, as it's been explained in the IID report from the Office of the Attorney General, and I hope the Attorney General will correct me if I am interpreting this wrong. But the potential cases are any case where an officer is involved with the death of a civilian or where a death is perhaps likely. The new and existing investigations are investigations which begin as the result of a potential case or investigations carried over from the prior reporting year. And the reports completed are the number of essentially completed investigations that are then referred out to the relevant prosecuting authority.
No, I understand it. And the concern is, or the clarification needed is when you talk about data including projections. So I think I may be overthinking it because I've lived that life. When you talk about projections on matters that where we move forward on concrete information is a little different than potential of information going forward. So maybe I'll just wait for the Attorney General. We've had some conversations regarding this matter going forward. So maybe it'll become clear to me by then. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Rosepep.
Yeah, thank you. Questions on page 3 and on page 5 relating to the breakout of functions. I see securities identified as 6% of spending, and I see another 6% as other. Should I assume correctly that antitrust is included in other and therefore falls below 6%?
Yes, Senator.
Okay, that was question number 1. Question number 2, which goes to page 5, of these additional assistant attorney general, staff attorneys, and administrative positions, are any of them targeted to either securities or antitrust?
I
couldn't tell where they're going.
So for the assistant attorneys general, I do not have any in my list showing as antitrust. The administrative positions, I do not have broken down by area of the Office of the Attorney General, but I can certainly.
Do you have any breakdown of the 28 at all? Of
the 28? Just besides the fact that they're in the divisions mentioned on page 5. I don't have the specific numbers on me for.
So the implication there, therefore not securities or antitrust, but just double check that.
Yes, sir.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Okay, Jacob, and I'm going to ask the Attorney General to perhaps think about the answer to the Senator's question while I ask Jacob another question about an unrelated matter, which is, let's talk about evictions.
Sure.
Can you clarify for me, please, when we talk about folks who've been turned away for lack of resources, can you just detail what you mean here?
Sure. So the lack of resources has to do with the fact that the program is still in its 3-year rollout. 3-year rollout program, 3-year rollout timeline. So there were only so many services providers engaged for fiscal 2023. As the program is funded at a higher level in fiscal 24, and then again in fiscal 25, they'll be able to add more providers to the program. And more importantly, they'll be able to disperse the applicants more efficiently amongst the different legal services providers, lowering the number of people turned away due to insufficient resources.
Okay. We are tracking the folks that we're turning away.
Yes.
Okay, that's helpful here. And then let's talk about the solvency of the fund.
Sure.
How did we get to the graph on page 9? Everything in yellow in fiscal 25.
Sure.
Is that by law? The amount in the
So-
fund?
I'm sorry.
The amount in the fund?
Right. So for fiscal 24, the amount was set as part of fiscal 22. That $14 million in fiscal 24 was a one-time appropriation, which is why it doesn't carry into fiscal 25.
Okay.
So far, each year, there's been action to add money to the ACE special fund, but that action has not yet been taken for fiscal 25. As for the emergency rental assistance program funding, that came via the grant agreement with DHCD, and the funding from certain investigations and settlements in the Office of the Attorney General is more fluid with the ability to change year over year as different cases are investigated and settled.
Okay, and the ERAP funds, just for clarification, those are federal funds that flowed through DHCD?
That's correct.
Thank you. Okay, any other questions for the analyst? All right, Mr. Attorney General, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Well, thank you, Madam Chair, Vice Chair Rosapet, members of the committee. In my this is my 17th session in Annapolis in different capacities. And putting aside the sessions where I was a member and sat through countless hearings, this is the very first time I have been in front of a budget subcommittee on a budget. So this is new terrain for me. But it's great to be here. I want to thank Jacob for your very thorough analysis of our agency, our budget, our programs. And I certainly want to take the opportunity with what time I have to address the issues that you've asked to speak to. So I'll do that, as well as answer some of the questions that were raised for Jacob that I think I may be able to provide additional information. So let me start first with the vacancies. Of the vacancies that are in the report, the analysis that was effective as of or ended December 31st, 2022, we've already filled 15 of those vacancies since taking office. 7 have already started, and 8 will start within the next few weeks. So that brings our vacancies down to 29.4 or 9.9%. And of that 29.4 vacancies, we are ready to make offers to set in 7 of those vacancies. We're ready to make offers. And in fact, if based on a phone conversation I made this morning, Carolyn, I'm joined by my deputy, Carolyn Katraki. I think we're probably ready to make offers on 8 of those vacancies. But we are actively recruiting. And I would say that the challenges with vacancies are salaries. And that's why I was pleased to see in the governor's budget request a 1 grade increase in salaries. I think that will go a long way in filling these vacancies. I would hope that the General Assembly can support that. I should note that we came in asking for a 2 grade increase. A 1 grade increase is music to our ears, but the battle continues. I think that that is contributed to already, because I think there's a lot of talk on the street that state government generally may see salary increases. And I think that may have contributed to our ability to fill these vacancies. And I think also the excitement of new leadership in government, right? A turnover, you got a new governor, people are excited, they want to be a part of it. The other point I wanted to mention that's related to vacancies, the question that you raised, Senator Rosapep, about securities. The challenge there, not just salaries, but a large percentage of the attorney positions in the securities division are contract positions. And the contracts are not reflected in these vacancy numbers that Jacob put out there, but that's a huge challenge. It's difficult to compete for skilled, competent, experienced attorneys in the public sector. We don't even think about competing with the private sector because we can't. But even within the public sector, when you compare Maryland salaries with those of the federal government, larger counties, more affluent counties in Maryland, we're at a competitive disadvantage. And then you add to that so many of these are contract positions. People are looking at these positions saying there are no benefits. If I take time off, I don't get paid for that time off. So that's been a real challenge.
Very specific issue that we haven't focused on much in this subcommittee, which is the contract versus employee position. Can you go a little deeper on that? How many contract positions do you have? Why are some contract positions and some employee positions? What's the kind of big picture on the problem you're describing?
Sure. Let me give you one example in a different unit, not the securities, because I don't have that number off the top of my head. I'm gonna go to my organized crime unit, because I am going to talk about them soon, where we have about I think we have about 11 or 12 regular employee positions. Governor Hogan expanded the capacity of that unit by giving us something like 15 contract positions. Some of them went to the U.S. Attorney for SALSA positions. Others didn't. Those are difficult to fill. So on paper, it's like, wow, you have almost twice the number of attorneys to do that work. But it's very difficult to attract an attorney. These experienced attorneys, they may be coming from the Department of Justice, or they may be coming from even from the State's Attorney's Office in Baltimore City, where they've got a lot of experience in organized crime. We can't attract them because they don't get the benefits, let alone the salaries.
Did the AG's office before your time ask for them to be pins, and DVM said, no, they want to be contract? Is that how it happened?
It's my understanding that particularly during the last administration, all new positions that we got, all personnel plus ups, came in the form of contracts, with a few exceptions, as opposed to regular pins.
And other than the lack of benefits, what is the difference between a contract position in your world and
the uncertainty of tenure? Now, granted, all attorneys in the Office of Attorney General serve at the pleasure of the Attorney General. But, when someone sees a contract versus a regular employment pin, it suggests that this could be short term.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Oh, I'm absolutely.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Joe. I want to follow with that, because I know in a lot of our departments, our concern is keeping our people. And that's why we continually do contracts. But we want to find ways where we can keep and continue to have our people work for us in our administration and your administration. And I know with all the contracts that we do have, are we trying to make that more available to them? And is there a way that we can do that? Because getting the opportunity to making sure that we're getting the finances to this department, are we going to hopefully make it available to them? And if we are, is there so much more we can do to get more people to work for you? I mean, again, you stated you had, I think, 10 or more pins from the previous administration. We're asking for more, but how can we keep those that we do have, maybe the contractors?
So at least in my world, in the Office of Attorney General, I see two areas where contract employment serves a purpose. One is in short term, usually grant funded programs. Right, I get a grant from the federal government to look at expanding our outreach efforts and the things that we're doing in the area of hate crimes. It's a 3-year, 4-year, maybe even less grant. I think a contract is appropriate in that position. You don't want to suggest to the person coming in that your employment will last any longer than the grant. So I think contracts are important there. I also think they're important, although I'm more careful in this area. Let's say I have a librarian and has been running a fantastic training and education program for me for years. To say, I'm thinking about retirement. I don't want to lose that experience. I don't want to lose that expertise. And I could see perhaps offering a contract to that person. You're going to go into retirement. I could use you 20 hours a week. Let me have that on a contract basis. But I think that's more the exception than the norm. When we're talking about attorneys primarily attorneys in the Office of Attorney General. I think some would say it's true. In fact, I was talking to the Office of the Public Defender. They don't have any contract employees over there. I said, wow, how'd you do that? But it's difficult to attract attorneys on contract. So I'll give you another example where the negative effect of a contract. When Governor Hogan did create these contract positions to go over to the state's attorney's office, what happens is they'll come in and these are sort of longer term contracts. Someone will come in, they'll spend a year, maybe 18 months, get a little bit of experience, and then jump to the U.S. Attorney's Office in the District of Columbia or jump somewhere else. So we're not providing them the security that is associated with regular employment. And I get that they're all at will. They understand that, but there's a greater sense of security when they see that it's a regular PIN. So that is the biggest challenge in this, particularly for securities. For securities, I don't know if we know the number offhand. I mean, like, I think 10 plus contract positions in the securities division.
Right now.
Yeah, security is sophisticated work. And trying to attract someone to a contract is difficult.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. You can see the subcommittee likes to get into the weeds on all the issues in front of us. So we appreciate
Right,
it.
I like the weeds. I tell you what, I'm glad to be back.
Okay.
You should see the hearings on Capitol Hill. I don't know what we.
Please continue.
The second point I wanted to raise is that in the governor's budget request, there are new positions that are in there, and I'd ask that you would keep them in there. And I would just want to highlight two of them. One is the organized crime unit. We have an organized crime unit in the Office of the Attorney General that is probably second to none when it comes to multi-jurisdictional investigations and prosecutions. We focus primarily on drug trafficking, on gun trafficking, on human trafficking, including labor and sex trafficking. We'd like to expand it to do a little bit more organized retail crime. They are second to none. They are the unit that so many law enforcement agencies, whether it's the FBI, ATF, Baltimore City Police, when they're looking at a multi-jurisdictional prosecutorial arm, they're coming to us. And we do fantastic work. We've got a lot of cases, wiretap cases, physical surveillance, using all sorts of sophisticated legal theories and technologies to bring successful cases. I said in my swearing in remarks that we're not going to investigate and prosecute our way to safer neighborhoods. There's a lot of work that has to be done. However, we do need to invest more in successful investigation and prosecution. So we've asked for 18 additional positions. And I can tell you, when I fill those 18, those folks are going to still be overworked, because that's how long the queue is from law enforcement organizations asking us to take cases. So we welcome the opportunity to take them. We want to address that backlog of investigations and continue to do the good work on behalf of the people of Maryland. Organized crime unit. I'm also requesting for 2 new investigative teams in the Medicaid fraud control unit. And you know that unit is funded 75% by the federal government, 25% by the state, just like most all of Medicaid is. The program was started 30 years ago. 1 or 2 states piloted it. It worked. They went after fraud. A few states joined, and then states backed out. And then at some point a few years ago, the federal government said, if you want to be part of the Medicaid program, you've got to have a Medicaid fraud control unit. So every state has one. We have one. We've got 8 teams of investigators. We've got prosecutors, investigators, auditors. We're developing a forensic investigation unit. Because a lot of this is, a lot of data, big volume data. So we're developing a forensic unit to work with that. We're asking for two new teams. And right now, the 8 teams, each of them have 10,000 providers that they have to keep an eye on. Now, not all 10,000 providers are engaged in Medicaid fraud, but they've got to scan the horizon for 10,000 providers regularly. That's a big workload. We think with 2 new units, we can cover a lot more ground. And let me just say this: I want to make this point, but I'm careful how I make this, because I don't want anyone to misunderstand. Medicaid fraud happens. Chances of Medicaid fraud going away is slim to none. It happens. It happens in big dollar programs, not only in government. You see it in the private sector. We engage in the Medicaid fraud investigation and enforcement to save taxpayer dollars money. Also, that program has been expanded so that we can investigate and enforce abuse and neglect cases, even when it's not for a Medicaid provider. So we're protecting Marylanders, patients and residents at assisted living facilities. We're recovering taxpayer dollars. Okay. You are going to get a tremendous return on investment by giving me 2 investigators. What we are going to recover not only will continue to protect Marylanders, but the recovery we get is going to more than cover their salary. And I could say the same thing for consumer protection, securities, and antitrust. I don't like to talk about them as profit centers because it's unseemly to do that. It's like when you're in your debate or discussion about should we have the speed cameras. Nobody says, yeah, let's do them because it's more revenue. We say, no, let's do them because we deter speeding and safer neighborhoods, but they do generate revenues. This generates revenues. It pays for itself. So we're asking for 2 new investigative teams to do more and more of that work. And by the way, more of that work that we're seeing is in abuse and neglect type cases. So those are 2 new positions I wanted to talk about. I'm fine. Yeah, because I just want to talk about, I want to address the antitrust and I also want to address the access to counsel, and I can be a lot quicker than I have been thus far. Yep.
Yeah, I want to pick up on that because when the controller was in here, she was talking about how they're a revenue producing agency and to invest in their staff to collect more revenue is good for the taxpayers. And I would just say, I would encourage you to think that way because the money you get back for the people, money you get back for taxpayers is truth, right, and justice with dollars attached to it. So I would just encourage you not to be a little more forward leaning. I have a specific question, which is, and I'm not expecting you to have it today. Do you have data for each of these verticals as to expense of investigation and prosecution or negotiation, however you enforce, and dollars recovered? I mean, we can look at that for antitrust. We can look at that for Medicaid fraud. We can look at that for securities. Is that data we can see?
So I don't have it now because when I walked through the door, I realized we need that data. So I've asked all of the enforcement divisions to let's do that return on investment analysis. What are we spending for? It's not just lawyers, it's investigators, it's auditors, it's the paralegals, it's administrative support. What do we spend? What do we get per per investigator, per case? Absolutely.
Perfect.
And so, we won't have that this session, but this is not the last session. I'm going to come back and ask for more. But when I do, that'd be great. You're going to get that.
Thank you.
I think it's going to be an eye opener. So the third point I wanted to mention, Madam Chair and members, is on the antitrust investigations and actions. Just a few years ago, we had 5 attorneys in that office, and we currently have 3, which includes the division director. So it's the division director and 2 others. During the period January of 2021 to March of 2022, which covers a portion of the period covered in this report in the analysis, we only had 2 AAGs. So that's one reason why down. But probably more important is that during the period covered in the analysis, there were no settlements in large multi-state cases in which we were involved. And that's where we get most of, our recoveries in the large multi-states. A lot of that had to do with the fact that we just didn't have the staffing to be as involved. And as I'm interacting with other AGs around the country, I'm convinced that Maryland can step up our participation in multi-state antitrust settlements. So I know we're not here to talk about over the target, but I can tell you right now, I've got 2. I have the over the target request for 1 additional attorney general, and if I get that in the supplemental budget, if there will be one, that'll bring me to 4, closer to the 5 that I once had, and 1 paralegal to be able to do that work. So my final point I wanted to mention, I'm almost embarrassed to mention this because Jacob did such a great job analyzing the access to counsel and evictions program. It's a fabulous program, a lot of dollars helping a lot of people, involving a lot of legal service organizations that are doing great things. It's ramping up, and even, you know, it's not completely ramped up, but it's still making a difference, as you see in the analysis, for so many people across the state. So my fourth point, I'm almost embarrassed to say, is that the suggestion or the recommendation is that the report that is provided, that is provided by the Maryland Legal Services Corporation and the Office of the Attorney General. And don't get me wrong, we will never say not our job. But if you look at the data that you have in front of you on the program, all of it comes from the Maryland Legal Services Corporation. They're keeping the data, they're tracking it, they're formatting it. They'll have no problem reporting it. We would just like to be relieved of the responsibility to do that with them. Small request.
We appreciate small requests in this room. Okay. Jacob seems to think that's not a bad idea, so let's keep talking about it as we
Excellent.
move forward. Okay, Senator Jackson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Mr. Attorney General. Congratulations. Welcome. I want to go back to the question I posed to Jacob on key observation on page 7. At the end, and maybe this belongs there, maybe it doesn't belong there, but again, look, first of all, we're your partners. I think you know that. For those of us, and we're certainly partners in this new role that the Office of the Attorney General has taken on since 2016, as you're aware, justice reinvestment and all the steps we've taken thus far. We still have a long way to go, obviously. But the new role of the Attorney General's Office, independent investigations, it speaks to the investigations, potential investigations, and then it talks about the chart also includes projections. Now, this is brand new, and so I want to be very careful, and I want us to be very careful, because I know, having lived in that world, I'm still somewhat in that world, that expectations need to be rightful expectations and not undue expectations that are going to lend to something that's going to kind of get our eye off of the prize that we're trying to achieve. So I am not certain what the projections mean. I understand what potential mean, obviously, because it's easy for us to quantify the cases that have occurred. Projections, I'm not sure if we're not too new in the game to begin to look at that. So, over a period of time, you can kind of look at what does the climate show with regard to whatever responsibilities agencies have. So I want to make sure that I'm not overreacting or reading too much into that point. But to me, understanding a salient point is understanding a salient point, because it's going to be up to you and your office to be able to explain that going forward. So again, we're your partner. So that's it. That's like a friendly amendment if necessary to this document. So.
If I could just comment, the law is pretty clear on what investigations are initiated by the Independent Investigation Division. And Jacob mentioned that these are police involved deaths, or as amended, I believe it was last year, incidents that could lead or likely lead to death. That part, there's a little gray area there. That's a determination that I make. In fact, we just had a recent case where in Baltimore County, where the person is still in critical condition in the hospital. We don't know whether or not he will die. I made the decision that likely lead to death, so we took that one. But it's the definition, the criteria of when we take it is pretty clear. So we'll get what we get. And I can't project the number of investigations from one year to the next. It is difficult to do. And I think with more experience in this, the projections will be based more on sort of trend lines and the implementation of some of the other police accountability, police reform measures that General Assembly imposes. As you probably know, Chair Smith, Judicial Proceedings, has a bill he's identified as a priority bill that would extend to our office the authority to prosecute cases that warrant prosecution after the independent investigation. We did testify in support of that bill as a best practice. I think when you speak with most states' attorneys, or at least if you speak with them in private, because I think I know publicly 23 of the 24 states' attorneys voted against extending that prosecutorial authority. I think when you speak with them privately, they'll tell you that, you know what, in our business, when we have a major crime, right? Homicides, rapes, serious violent offenses, prosecutors like to be involved upfront. It's not unusual for a high visibility homicide for a prosecutor to be at the crime scene before that crime scene is even cleared. And you know this probably better than anyone else, Senator Jackson. So the fact that today I'm doing the investigations and then I'm turning it over to prosecutors in these high visibility cases, they don't like that. They'd rather be part of the investigation that will or will not lead to a prosecution. But that's a system that you all set up 2 years ago. The horse is out of the barn. I think it was a great decision, right? Police accountability improves public confidence in policing. I think improves public safety. But now you got to finish the job. And I know you're not the authorizing committee on that. You will vote on it. But I mention that only because if you do, then I have asked the chairman, Smith, that I need a few more people on that one.
So if I might, Madam Chair.
I need 4 people to be exact.
Look,
Yeah.
so if I might, Madam Chair, and I won't be labored. I think, and I appreciate how you responded to my question or my observation, because again, been there, done that in a regard. And I think as we start out this program together, and again, we are all in this together now, that we need to make sure that the projection component is where it lies. So thank you. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you, Senator. Mr. Attorney General, we have a lot of questions. Let's keep pulling on this thread, though, of the 4 additional AGs that you will need. I appreciate that that's, if the bill were to pass and its implementation date is July 1st, October 1st, do you know off the top of your head?
October
October
1st.
1st.
Yes.
So we would obviously need to bake those 4 positions into this budget.
Yes.
Okay. So could we get that in writing from your
Absolutely.
office?
And we're going to send you that.
Okay.
Carolyn had to leave. Carolyn had to leave. Apologies. We're going to get you that. 2 attorneys, 1 investigator, 1 paralegal,
Okay.
and we'll get you that. We're going to also get you the information about 2 other priorities that are going to require additional personnel: Civil Rights Enforcement Authority that we've asked for, as well as Pattern and Practice Investigation Authority of law enforcement when there are signs of repeated misconduct, which we think is another evolution of the police reform that you all set out on several years ago.
That's helpful. You discussed a little bit coordination, and can you talk to us a little bit about the opportunity we have at this moment, you being new, a new U.S. attorney, formerly a colleague of ours, a new state's attorney in Baltimore City, a real moment in time for more closely held coordination and cooperation between all 3 of your levels of government. Can you speak to us about how that's going so far?
Sure, absolutely. I think it was probably best represented 2 weeks ago at a public safety summit that was convened by Brandon Scott, mayor of Baltimore. And he had on stage with him and in the audience a number of others, but had the mayor, Governor Moore, your attorney general, and State's Attorney Ivan Bates. And we all spoke about public safety. We talked about the coordination between our offices, information sharing, working to support one another, not to dictate and direct. I've always said that as the Attorney General, I recognize that, and it's hard to quantify. I just throw the number out to illustrate a point. 95% of the crime fighting happens at the local level. Your local law enforcement working with their state's attorney. The 5% that I may do through my organized crime unit, through Medicaid fraud, I have environmental crimes unit. That's an important 5% that supports our local law enforcement. And every case that we take through the organized crime unit, we are doing that in partnership with local state's attorneys, local law enforcement. It's key. It's important. We cannot, nor should we dictate as a state what any jurisdiction is doing in terms of setting priorities. What we should be doing is supporting them, having open lines of communication, regular, convening of stakeholders to talk about the best strategies. I'll always have an opportunity, I believe, to sit down with state's attorneys around the state and share with them my views, my opinions based on the collective experience of my team, share that with state's attorneys and say, look, this is what we would recommend. And at the end of the day, when we walk out the door and they say, this is what we're doing, whether it aligns with me 100% or not, that's our strategy in that county. So it's one of coordination and collaboration. The U.S. Attorney, Eric Barron, although he wasn't at that particular one, you may know that on day one, Governor Moore's, one of his day one press conferences, he was flanked by his Attorney General and the U.S. Attorney, Eric Barron, again, demonstrated that we're all committed to work together.
We appreciate that. Thank you. Senator Salling.
Thank you. Just getting back and talking about the fiscal 2024 allowance of 57 new positions, and they include the ones you were talking about, the 28 assistants and the specifics in that, the 6 staff attorneys, the 1 with the technician, and the 22 administrators. But you've talked about 16 other pins or contracts and 2 team units that you would need. Would that also be a part of that, or this is just an add-on to more?
Well, those, I mean, the 2 new investigative units, that's in here.
Can be a part of that?
Yeah, that's in here. That's already, that's not new. New is civil rights enforcement, pattern of practice enforcement, and Chairman Smith's prosecutorial authority.
And the thing is that our emphasis has been just trying to get the people that you need, the qualified people that you want, qualified people that you could keep, and making sure that we work together, as the good senator said. I know in time, they move on, that federally, they move to other places, and I still want to try to find ways where we can keep our people and keep our good prosecutors. I mean, the prosecutions and the cases they build, and I know they're very hard to do the job in that area. And we want to just make sure how we can help that as your legislators. We want to do what's right and what's best for our units and everything. So if there's something more that we need to do, there's something more that we can do, that's why we're here, and I want to thank you.
Thank you.
Let's keep going down that lane. Vacancy rate. We appreciate the updated data you provided in your testimony. I'm asking everybody in front of the subcommittee this year, appreciating you inherited a lot of the problems. Not that we don't love our former Attorney General, but you did take on some of the vacancy rate from that last administration. Can you speak to us about some of the challenges, opportunities? You talked about salary schedule. Where would you like to be in terms of that vacancy rate this time next year when we reconvene for this budget hearing?
So when we reconvene next year at this hearing, for this hearing budget, the vacancies that are presented before you, my goal is that they're all filled, and that the only vacancies that we're talking about, given, for example, some of these new positions that I hope you give me, civil rights, pattern of practice, prosecutorial authority, probably a year from now, we'll be talking about some vacancies there as we're filling those. But the ones that we have here, my goal is to drive that to 0.
Okay, we will be providing a most improved award next year.
For
a vacancy.
I'm looking forward to that. Challenge, challenge is on.
And one more piece of this, that we had a bill in front of BNT yesterday about salary schedules and taking that, not taking it away, but giving more authority to certain departments, divisions. Is that something that would be helpful to you in tackling your vacancy rate?
Yeah, and thank you, because I did mention it yesterday in the House. And I believe that I need an alternate salary schedule for my attorneys to be able to manage them. Look, I'm going to fight for increased salaries for both attorneys and non-attorneys in my agency. When I'm fighting for salary increases, let's say for an executive administrator in the Office of Attorney General, executive administrator in the Department of Transportation, executive administrator in the governor's office, we all should be fighting for that state government employee and raise their salaries. Not all of us, not all the agencies have attorneys. It's a specialized group, brings a specialized skill. And I believe that I can better manage them. I'll just give you one example that we're going to bump into, and we're going to have to resolve this. If you do the 1 grade increase, and I certainly hope that you do, I have a lot of people who, I've got leaders in grade 26, and where do you put them? I know you don't want me to put them in the executive service. I mean, there was a time when the General Assembly, I was part of the General Assembly then, we looked at the executive service, and said, wow, there are way too many people there. We got to bring them out of the executive service. But so I got to figure that one out. I've got most of my principal counsel and division chiefs are grade 26. So how do we give them a grade increase? If I have what we showed, DBM was an alternate salary schedule that had, I believe, 11 grades for attorneys. Like, I don't use the lower grades for attorneys, right? So we could cut those out. I think we can work with 11 grade schedule, and we'd be able to manage our attorneys much more effectively.
Okay, we'll certainly take that under consideration. Thank you.
Right.
Senator Rosepap.
Yeah, I'd just like to make a comment for the staff. I would like, when we come back and deliberate on these things, to address that issue and address the contractual issues as part of our agenda. But in terms of 2 last questions. One is, you mentioned your additional requests for positions to the governor, I guess, to DBM, in several examples you gave.
So like civil rights, pattern of
Yeah,
practice, those were all in fiscal notes. Yep. There are accurate fiscal notes for each one of those bills.
So have we received that, what those requests are? Do we have that in our file?
I don't believe we do, but if you could get this, whatever you got to the governor about supplemental, I know we'd appreciate it.
That would be great. Really appreciate that a lot, because as you know, we changed the Constitution 2 years ago.
Yeah, no,
We want to be smart about this stuff.
Okay.
So please always share that with us and the folks on the House side as well.
We're going to get you that. We're going to get you the positions that we would need for the additional authorities that both we and members of the General Assembly are seeking. And we will also get you a list of our over the target we sent. I'll get you the over the target as well.
Yeah, whatever they are. I'm not saying we're going to give them to you. I'm just saying we want to know what they are.
Yeah. Oh, I thought this was we were forming a contract right here.
I know, exactly. But
Offer
seriously,
an acceptance.
yeah, no. So that's what we really appreciate that. The other question I had, this is my last question, unless your answer is so stimulating, it stimulates another question. You talked about organized crime several times, and organized crime comes in various shades. Do you have a sense of what the distribution of organized crime is between financial, drugs, fraud, breaking into people's houses? I don't know. There are different kinds of organized crime.
Right. And the vast majority of the organized crime that we focus on are drugs and guns.
Okay.
Now, there's always finances involved with that, but I think I know where you're going in the question. We're not focused, and the cases that are brought to us by our law enforcement partners are not sort of like the white collar.
That was my question.
Financial crimes.
Gotcha.
I'm too new in the office to say what the experience is in the office with those types of crimes. I imagine the U.S. attorney takes a lot of those cases, but the cases that I've been involved with now in this 8 weeks I've been here are drugs and guns, and they're multi-jurisdictional. I know we often talk about Baltimore City and the crime in Baltimore City. The one thing I can say is that and we all know, crime is not limited to Baltimore City, but Baltimore City is at the intersection of, where we do things in Howard County, Baltimore County, and it all sort of goes through Baltimore City in one way or the money, either the money, the drugs, or the guns. It may originate or be stored or stashed somewhere. People may reside in other counties, but at one time or another, it's going to make its way to Baltimore City, and then down in the National Capital Region, you also have multi-jurisdictional crime, and a lot of that also is with the District of Columbia.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam.
Thank you. Okay, a few more small questions on the Medicaid fraud. Appreciating that your current teams have a caseload of 10,000. Is there an industry best practice that we should be aiming for here?
So, and let me clarify, not 10,000 cases.
Pardon.
But they're scanning the horizon for 10,000 providers where there may be potential. So I'll have to get you the answer on that, on what the industry standard is or best practice, and then what our sort of reality is. I'll do that.
Okay.
I will say that you know, I am pleased that we get the majority of our referrals from the Maryland Department of Health for obvious reasons. And those referrals were down over the last several years, just like referrals for environmental enforcement, for labor standards violations were down. So we're looking forward to a return to a time when we're getting a lot of referrals, more referrals from the Maryland Department of Health. And again, another reason why 2 additional investigative units would be helpful, but I will get you the answer on standards and best practices.
Just curious. I think the committee would be interested in that. On the IDD report, appreciate that you, it came in just a few months late. Appreciate that you were new to the job, but moving forward, I know this subcommittee and our friends over in JPR would appreciate that, just so we can start thinking about best practices for if there's additional legislation needed or budget needed as we move forward. Thank you for that.
Can I comment on that?
Please, yeah.
I think what happened, as I understood it, so I looked at the report, which we have right here. I said, wow, and what a wonderful looking picture. My predecessor. He signed the report November 29th.
Okay.
And I think what happened, what I was told, is it went to the authorizing committees and didn't make it to the budget committee.
Okay.
Well, so
It happens.
yeah, but no, we'll make sure we get on time. Just kind of one of the reorganizations we're doing in the Office of the Attorney General is we sort of dealt with our interaction with the General Assembly, sort of finance on, you know, and the budget stuff with, you know, kind of one group, and the authorizing stuff another group. We're consolidating that. It should be one team. Hannibal Camara is our guy. I didn't introduce Rhea Harris, who's now the deputy of our legislative team, and Adam Spangler, who's our legislative assistant. And he probably knows what position you played on your favorite sport in high school. He's that kind of guy. But it's all under one roof now.
Okay.
So it'll be, I hope more, it'll be seamless.
Appreciate that. For the record, it was short staff, but if you ever need to know, Adam. Okay, last question on the audit for the medical examiner. Can you give us a timeline on that moving forward, if there is one?
So today, or this week, I should say, let me back up. So as you know, this was brought to our attention by a forensic pathologist, a medical examiner out of Washington, D.C., when he saw what we all saw, a jaw-dropping testimony in the George Floyd case. He brought it to the attention of Brian Frost, which was fantastic. 400 medical examiners signed on to it. I was pleased to see from afar both the governor and the attorney general working together, saying this is a problem. They funded it. All of those examiners that actually did the work, all but maybe 1 or 2 were from out of country, and they did it voluntarily because they recognized the value in understanding how bias may play out in the examinations and the medical conclusions that spring from that when it involves race. So they narrowed that large pool of reports down to a manageable about 100. The next phase is to develop the methodology on how we're going to review the 100. We are asking for money in the budget to be able to give this next round of medical examiners a stipend. We're not going to be able to pay them for their past work. I think they were all sort of felt good and proud about being able to participate. We do want to be able to give them a stipend. I'm going to be engaging them next. They're all over the world. So we're going to do a Zoom or a team meeting. I'm going to thank them. I'm going to tell them, look, we're ready to go to the next round where we're looking at that 100. I'm hesitant because I want to manage expectations and giving you a date and time when it's going to be done, because all I can do is say that it's a priority. We are moving forward. We appreciate the resources we have to get this done. It's not easy work. I'll give you an example. We've got to figure out if we're saying to this next round of medical examiners, we want you to review these reports And we want you to determine whether or not the conclusions that were made are supported by the report, or whether there was any bias in the report. How do you scrub identifying information about who the decedent was? It's easy on paper. What about the photographs? Right. So we're working through that. What are the protocols? What's the methodology so that when those medical examiners look at these 100 or so cases, that they can do it in a manner that we can all have confidence that it was done right.
We appreciate that and certainly want it to be done well.
Yep.
So thank you. Seeing no further questions, we greatly appreciate your time and hope your first time in the Senate wasn't terribly painful. We appreciate it.
It was painless. Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. We have one more witness signed up to testify on this budget, Deb Seltzer with the Maryland Legal Services Corporation. And Ms. Seltzer, I believe we also have your written testimony as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Deb Seltzer. I'm the Executive Director of the Maryland Legal Services Corporation, which, as you just heard, administers the Access to Counsel in Evictions program, which now flows through the Attorney General's budget. We appreciate Jacob's thorough analysis of the program. I just wanted to state that we are happy to do the reporting for this very important work, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Deb, do you have suggestions for us on how we're going to reconstitute the fund moving forward?
So there is legislation currently pending, SB 756 from Chair Gazzoni, that would make that distribution from the Abandoned Property Fund permanent. So that would be $14 million annually. That will not be enough to fully fund the program when it is fully implemented. The estimate is more around $28 million a year. So there will be another source needed, but that would offer much stability. One of the biggest challenges so far has been hiring. And so paired with kind of the low salaries, as the Attorney General talked about in public service, but when you're looking at nonprofit civil legal services providers, those salaries are even lower. So hiring has been a challenge, but being able to offer this stability of, we know this program will exist in the future will certainly help with that. So we will need another funding source. I know the Access to Counsel and Evictions Task Force has recommended that a line item appropriation in the budget of just state budget funds might be the best method going forward.
We appreciate that. Any further questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Jacob. Next, we have the Maryland Emergency Medical System Operations Fund, lovingly known as MSOF. And we have Madeline Miller as our analyst. Madeline, when you are ready.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Good afternoon. Today I'm presenting the DLS analysis for the Maryland Emergency Medical System Operations Fund, or MEMSOF. Most of the fund's revenue comes from a biennial surcharge of $29 on motor vehicle registrations and a $7.50 moving violation surcharge. That surcharge amount that the fund receives is the revenues in excess of disbursements to the State Widow and Orphans Fund, the Charles W. Riley Fire and Emergency Medical Services Tuition Reimbursement Program, and the Maryland State Firemen's Association. The pie chart on page 3 shows how the $90.4 million allowance is broken down. The 3 largest expenditures are for the Maryland State Police Aviation Command, or MSPAC, which receives 47% of the allowance, the Maryland Institute for Emergency Medical Services Systems, or MIMS, which receives 21%, and the Senator William H. Amos Fire, Rescue, and Ambulance Fund, or AMIS Fund, which receives 16% of the allowance. Additionally, the Maryland Fire and Rescue Institute and the R. Adams Cowley Shock Trauma Center receive the remaining 16%. Exhibit 2 on page 4 shows MEMSOF expenditures from fiscal 22 to 24, and that expenditures increased 7.6% over the working appropriation. That growth is primarily attributable to the employee compensation enhancements and the use of MEMSOF funds for helicopter maintenance. While helicopter maintenance funds were supported with $3.4 million in general funds in both fiscal 22 and fiscal 23, they will resume being funded with MEMSOF funds in fiscal 24. Exhibit 3 on page 5 shows MEMSOF revenues and expenditures from fiscal 2013 through 2022. Looking at this exhibit, you'll notice that revenues and expenditures were approximately $56 million in fiscal 2013. However, the MVA registration fee increased and revenues rose sharply in fiscal 2015. While expenditures rose too, revenues outpaced expenses by an average of $7.6 million between fiscal 2014 and 2017. There was a net operating deficit in fiscal 2018 through 2022, in part due to declining MVA revenues during the pandemic. Exhibit 4 on page 6 details the continued impact of COVID-19 on MEMSOF revenues in fiscal 22, particularly for the MVA and moving violation revenues. Overall, revenues were 5.2% lower than anticipated, and they have not returned to their pre-pandemic levels. Traditional revenue streams for the fund are also not expected to meet their pre-pandemic levels in the current fiscal year. Though $10 million of general fund support is provided in the current year, revenues will continue to be lower than expenditures. The discussion of the DLS forecast for the fund begins on page 8 with a comparison of the assumptions for the DLS that DLS and DBM make. The two forecasts are provided in Exhibit 6 on page 9 and in Appendix 2. Our revenue estimates differ slightly each year due to the figures available when the forecasts are done. DLS also includes personnel salary enhancements in its expenditure estimates, and different approaches are taken to estimating expenditure growth rates. These differences in the working appropriation allowance and out years. However, there are also assumption differences relevant to fiscal 22 and fiscal 23 specifically, which change the projected insolvency date. The DBM fiscal 22 ending balance is $17.7 million, which includes an overstatement in fiscal 22 revenues as compared with the comptroller's report. The closing balance should be reflected as $13.1 million instead. Revenues are again misstated in fiscal 2023. Though $3.6 million in general funds are provided to MSPAC, that only decreases the need that MSPAC has from the MEMSOF fund in fiscal 22 and in fiscal 23. Despite the one-time influx of $10 million in general fund support in fiscal 23 and the reduced MEMSOF expenditures across the previous year and the current year, the fund's expenditures exceed its revenues in fiscal 23 and beyond. Accordingly, the DBM and DLS forecasts estimate insolvency in different years. The DLS forecast projects that MEMSOF will become insolvent in fiscal 24 and require approximately $2.5 million in additional general fund support. That figure increases to $17.4 million in fiscal 2025. Slight changes in the projection could increase the amount that is required. The administration and the MEMSOF board should comment on how they intend to cover expenses for recipient agencies given the likely insolvency in fiscal 2024 and how they intend to improve the fund's health going forward to avoid an increased reliance on general fund support. Exhibit 7 on page 12 shows that the spending gap is estimated to grow to $32.8 million by fiscal 2029. The diminishing health of the fund is of great concern to the using agencies and the state's emergency medical system. Though it would be possible to improve the health of the fund in fiscal 24 and 25 by providing general fund support for helicopter maintenance or by funding salary enhancement with general funds, neither action would reduce the overall costs to the state. It is the opinion of DLS that the General Assembly will need to consider fee increases or other revenue enhancements to sustain current levels of MEMSOF supported operations beyond the allowance. This would require enactment of separate legislation no later than the current session for any changes to be implemented prior to fiscal 2025. The General Assembly should further consider providing MEMSOF with at least $25 million in additional general funds to support operations through fiscal 2025, providing an opportunity to consider legislation addressing the health of the fund in the 2023 or 2024 sessions. That concludes my presentation, and I would be happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Madeline. I think this proves why we have two agencies looking at the budget, DBM and DLS, and we appreciate your close focus on this and the challenge that the subcommittee has before us in closing that gap. Questions for Madeline? I do have one question, Madeline. So we go from a 2.5 million not vacancy, discrepancy, or
Mhm.
whatever you want to call it, in fiscal 24, that jumps to 17, just over 17 and 25. Can you speak to that drastic increase?
Sure. So there's things that are happening both in the revenues and in the expenditure portion, which contribute to that change. So for the revenues, overall, the MVA registration fees have been lower than estimated over the last few years, as well as the income from the moving violation surcharge. So while those are decreasing, expenditures are also increasing. We add back in the costs for helicopter maintenance, which were provided in a supplemental budget last year. And then we also add in personnel salary enhancements. And in the out years, the estimated growth of those budgets over time.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you. Okay, thank you, Madeline. With us, we have Chairman of MSOF Board, Mr. Clay Stamp, and whoever else. I don't have you listed. I apologize.
Oh, great. And we have Dr. Ted Delbridge with us,
Thank
who's
you,
the
Ted.
Executive
Appreciate that.
Director of the Maryland Institute for Emergency Medical Services Systems. And if you would entertain, Madam Chair, I would introduce the rest of the coalition, if you don't mind. So additionally, we have the President of the Maryland State Firemen's Association, Mr. Ben Kurtz. We have the first Vice President, Eric Smothers, Mr. Skip Carey. We have Dr. Christy Snedeker of the R. Adams Kelly Shock Trauma Center, Major Tagliaferri from the MSP Aviation Command, and Pat Marlette from the Maryland Fire Rescue Institute, and Ms. Pat Gaynor, who is Legislative Support and Policy for MEMS as well. So we thank you for all you do to support the Maryland EMS system. I chair an 11-member board that you all created by statute, dedicated individuals, volunteer board. And we work very closely with this coalition. We're all very proud of our EMS system in Maryland. We have done our due diligence to make sure expenditures were in line with the mission. And we feel strongly that they are. But as you heard from Madeline, we running into some headwinds when it comes to funding the budget. And so Ted can speak a little bit to the administration, work with the administration to try to come up with a solution this year. But clearly next year, we're going to need the support of the legislature to find a structural solution to allow us to continue to deliver the service that we do. So again, I thank you for all your support for our EMS system. There's over 20,000 licensed paramedic EMTs, many of which are firefighters throughout the state. Nurses, doctors make up the whole system, and we work day in and day out to make sure that Maryland has the best system that we can have. So with that, if you don't mind, I'll turn it over to Dr. Delbridge.
Hi, good afternoon, Madam Chairman and members of the subcommittee. I thought I would spend just a little bit of time telling you how MEMS, or the Maryland Institute for Emergency Medical Services Systems, contributes to the EMS system and some of what the MSOF goes to support. First of all, thanks to Madeline Miller for a thoughtful analysis, and also Rebecca Bozzari, who's our DVM analyst assigned to us. MEMS is responsible for providing medical oversight to the EMS system, promulgating statewide clinical protocols, so the care delivered in Annapolis is the same as the care that's delivered in Hagerstown, for example. Licensing and certifying EMS clinicians, nearly 20,000 of them, maintaining and operating a statewide communication system. I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a second. And designated trauma and specialty centers, and also licensing and regulating commercial ambulance services. We are in a multi-year project to upgrade the communication system that enables a paramedic or an EMT any place in the state to talk to medical guidance any place else in the state, particularly linking up people in the field with, for example, the physicians at the trauma center to make sure the patients are getting optimal care and being destined for the appropriate place to continue their care. It includes over 200 tower sites in 50 different hospitals, both in Maryland and outside of Maryland. And this has been a project for the last 5 years that continues. We are also very cognizant of the issue of emergency department crowding in Maryland. It is a factor of life every single day for the EMS system. We have for more than 2 decades supported a system called the County Hospital Alert Tracking System, where emergency departments can register online their stress, if you will. And they go on something called Yellow Alert that ostensibly guides EMS clinicians to a different hospital if one's available. that system has sort of outlived its life expectancy, if you will, and we are actively working with CRISP, the Chesapeake Regional Information System for our patients, to design a new system that will not rely on hospital staff to register the stress of their emergency department, but will be an objective measure of how many patients are in the emergency department compared to how many patients they're capable of managing. And in closing, and I know you all have that in writing, and I'm sure you've read it. In closing, we are grateful for the MSOF. It is it is honored. It is respected by most every other state in the country. It represents a constant source of funding that is appropriate for managing the EMS system over the course of time. We are working closely with the folks at DBM to find a short-term solution that will bridge us to a longer-term solution. And we're aware that we need a different source of funds, either an escalation of the funding source that currently comes to the MSOF or an alternative. And we're anxious to continue such discussions that lead us to that place.
We'd like to have our partners step up. Great. We'll bring up Major Tagliaferri from State Police Command.
Good afternoon. My name is Major Michael Tagliaferri. I'm the commander of the Maryland State Police Aviation Command. I would like to formally thank the committee members and our analysts for a great report. Appreciate all that you've done. The Maryland State Police Aviation Command is extremely proud to be the leading public safety organization in essential statewide aviation services to the citizens of Maryland for the past 53 years. Our mission to protect and improve the quality of life is accomplished through the airborne delivery of emergency medical, law enforcement, search and rescue, homeland security, and disaster assessment services. We are committed to working with our EMS partners, our trauma partners, and our fire partners to continue to deliver the highest level of service possible. Since our inception in 1970, we have flown over 150,000 patients to area trauma centers and saving countless lives. The command continues to work with our local and state partners to fine-tune training, communications, and operations. We are dedicated to flying highly trained trooper paramedics to trauma scenes, equipped with the latest medical technology and skills to safely deliver injured patients to area trauma centers. The department has submitted written testimony and appreciate your time. The MSPAC, along with its partners, acknowledges the insolvency of the MSOF and is committed to working with our partners, the legislature, the governor's office, to find a long-term solution to insolvency of the MSOF fund. Be happy to answer any questions you have. Turn it over to our partner here, Dr. Christy Snedeker from Shock Trauma.
Thank you, Major. Good afternoon. Thank you for your time today. Thank you for your report. It is my privilege to be here. My name is Christy Snedeker. I'm the Vice President of the R. Adams Cali Shock Trauma Center, and I do have that privilege to serve in that role. And I'm pleased to be here with my partners of our coalition that are supporting the MSOF. MSOF has been the cornerstone of the state's capability to provide every citizen a broad and uncompromised safety net. It's a special protected fund. It allows the system to respond instantaneously to the variability of Maryland's political and economic fortunes. As established by state law, the R. Adams Cali Shock Trauma Center is the core element of the state's emergency medical services system and serves as the state's primary adult resource center for the treatment of trauma. We treat over 6,000 patients a year with a 97% survival rate at no cost to Maryland citizens. We don't divert any patients that come to us from the scene, whether it's from our ground EMS partners or from our partners in the Maryland State Aviation Command. That is a huge asset to Marylanders. The facility and its staff are organized for on-demand access and treatment of the state's most critically ill and injured patients to a degree unparalleled anywhere else in our trauma system. As a result, the Shock Trauma Center has unique operating and financial requirements that distinguish it from any other Maryland trauma centers, so that we are at the ready and have the assets ready for anyone that comes through our doors. The Shock Trauma has always received financial support from the state for operating and capital expenses. The governor's included $3.7 million in the state operating support for Shock Trauma for fiscal year 2024. We're extremely grateful for those funds and really appreciate your time today. Next up, Eric Smothers.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairman, and members of the committee. My name is Eric Smothers. I'm the first vice president of Maryland State Firemen's Association, and I represent the 365 volunteer fire and rescue companies across the state of Maryland. The MSOF fund is very important to our volunteer cadre across the state, and that it enables us to continue to provide the fire services that we know it across our state. That is kind of second to none across the United States, I believe. The funds that are generated through MSOF allows us the ability to help replace needed equipment, EMS resources, vehicles, and/or upgrade our medical needs across the state. During the pandemic, our volunteers continued to provide service across the state of Maryland, which also interferes or was not helpful that a lot of our volunteer entities were not able to go out and do fundraising that would normally help support their physical needs to their departments. And it's variable across the state. That certainly put a damper in our abilities to be able to continue to provide some of those services, particularly in some of the far outreaches of our state. We're very grateful for the AMOS fund and that it allows us to provide assistance to many departments across the state to maintain a level of service that we know it today. Along with our partners, we understand the financial impact that it is to our citizens of Maryland, and they come here to ask for funds that are in a time where it's difficult for our citizens. But in order to maintain that service across the state, we would ask for your help with an infusion of funds to help get us down the road, and also to look at a sustaining piece of financial stability for this fund as we go forward.
I'm Pat Marlatt. I'm the Deputy Director of the Maryland Fire and Rescue Institute, University of Maryland College Park. We've been at the university since 1930. We are the state's comprehensive emergency services training organization, and we serve every jurisdiction in the state from Baltimore City and all 23 counties. Before anyone responds, before anything happens, people need to be trained first and foremost. We appreciate your support. You have our written testimony, and unless you have any questions, thank you very, very much for all that you've done for us.
Thank you. And a few of us went through Fire Ops 101 a few years back at your facility, and we appreciate the opportunity to get it.
Love to have you back anytime.
Okay, thank you. Nice interim project. I hate to play musical chairs, but I'm going to ask a couple folks to come back up for some questions.
Sure.
Mr. Stamp, and if the major can come up as well, I appreciate that. So first of all, thank you, all of you, for having a couple meetings prior to this hearing so we can talk about some of the issues there before we got out here. But I do want to make sure this insolvency issue is, it's not small. So can you talk to us about how you as a board project your needs versus the funding that you have, and how in the future can we maybe avoid this issue when we are insolvent, as opposed to kind of projecting out some challenges in future years so we can maybe get a little bit more ahead of it than we are now?
Well, I'll take a stab at it, and I might ask Dr. Delbridge to come forward as our executive director, but clearly it's the mission of the EMS board to make sure that we scrutinize expenditures to ensure that we're meeting the mission. The mission is pretty clear. The expenditures have been looked at clearly. They're not over the top largely. This is the cost to deliver the service that we have built, and the deficit we're going to realize is real. And so we know that an infusion this year will get us through a tough time this year, but we will have to look at a structural solution moving forward. And the EMS system in Maryland is a product of this body. Yeah. And we're going to look to you for some assistance and to be creative about how we can fund the deficit moving forward so we can keep the premier system that we have. And we hope that we'll have the support of the administration and the General Assembly to do that.
And this subcommittee is very grateful for the services everybody who's testified and your partners provide, and understand the value more than anything of the program. What I want to make sure is moving forward, I'm not disputing the needs that you have. It's all incredibly valuable to the state. What I would like to work with you, as long as for the next 4 years at least, is that we get out ahead of potential deficits, so we don't have to backfill with general funds or reevaluate funding streams, particularly as we're entering potential challenges for the budget. So whatever that's going to look like, I just think we need to work together and project needs and deficits a little better together. Okay,
Agree.
thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, I have one more question for the major. We've talked about this before, but some of the close calls that we've seen in terms of public safety, the Easton Hospital incident. Can you just speak a little bit how we are going to get ahead of that moving forward, and how we can, whatever the subcommittee can do to provide extra support to your team to make sure that we don't have any future close calls?
Sure. We've done an after action report on the incident. I've worked closely with Dr. Delbridge, who oversees the MIMS personnel that work in the Operation Control Center. We have several results of the after action report that we're working together to ensure that our personnel are trained. And once they're trained, they are following proper protocols and procedures. So I can assure you that we're working towards a solution to that.
Is it possible, is that after action report a public document?
Sure, I can certainly
so?
get you a redacted copy of that information.
Okay, I think the subcommittee would be very interested in that.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, any further questions? We have our work cut out for us on this one, so I'm gonna need the whole subcommittee's support in figuring out this year and projected out years. Okay.
I would like to recognize also another individual, an important group of people, individual in the room is Jeffrey Buttle. He's president of the International Association of Firefighters. He represents a key component of many firefighters who are EMS clinicians in Maryland as well. So
Thank you for recognizing Mr. Buttle. We also have Mr. Grant Walker. They're both my constituents and very proud members and leaders in IAFF, so we appreciate their support as well. Okay.
Thank you.
Seeing that, thank you all very much for being here.
Okay.
To the whole team. Thank you. Okay, finally, Madam Secretary, thank you for your patience as always. All right, we have the DPSCS administration and offices. We have Mr. Jacob Cash with us. Jacob, when you are ready.
My notes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Today we'll be going over the DPSCS administration and offices analysis. This includes the overall administrative support for the department, the programmatic support for the department, as well as 2 independent offices, the Inmate Grievance Office, as well as the Maryland Commission on Correctional Standards. The overall budget for this fiscal 2024 allowance is $199 million, which is a 4.5% increase, as you can see clearly on the cover page. Just to provide a bit of an overview for what this budget includes. Oh, my apologies. I just think I need to share. There we go. Apologies for that. As you can see, this includes several administrative units. First off, the Executive Office of the Secretary, which includes the IT Division, the Intelligence and Investigative Division, as well as Division of Capital Construction and Facilities Maintenance, their administration of major IT projects, and overall administrative services for the department. Also newly under the Office of the Secretary is the Warrant Apprehension Unit, added to the Intelligence and Investigative Division, and I'll go in a little bit more into what that entails in just a little bit. There's also the Office of the Deputy Secretary for Operations, and these organize and administer department-wide contracts and services, specifically for medical and clinical services, as well as security operations, importantly, including the Canine Contraband Unit. Maryland Commission on Correctional Standards is an independent office, but they conduct compliance audits of correctional facilities and develop standards for what those facilities should operate like. And the Inmate Grievance Office independently handles any grievance that inmates issue against the department or any of their employees. One of the performance measures we look at for the administration is the recidivism rates, and that's because the administration is the one that puts these together every year. Exhibit 1 shows the single year recidivism rates and specifically those that were returned to correctional custody, so not community supervision. In 2021, that release cohort started to increase recidivism after reopening of after COVID. You can see the 2019 and 2020 release cohorts, mostly that information was captured during the pandemic. But for the first year after reopening, we see a bit of an increase. It's still lower than it was before the pandemic. One of the interesting trends I'll point out here is that expiration of sentence releases actually have less recidivism than parolees or mandatory releases. And that is a reversal of trends from before the pandemic. Perhaps that has something to do with those that chose to stay instead of taking up parole options. Exhibit 2 shows the 3-year recidivism for just the 2019 release cohort. This cohort has been affected by COVID-19 and compared to the pre-COVID baseline, their recidivism is better. In total, 68.5% of those that were released in fiscal 2019 did not recidivate, and they have been active participants of the community. About equal proportions were returned to either probation or to correctional custody for a new offense, whereas a similar proportion as well had their community supervision revoked due to either a technical violation or a very small percentage for a new offense. The next performance measure is home detention populations. You can see that there was a large increase during COVID-19, and that spiked over 500 cases for CHDU. This has returned to a normal level, which is improving the caseload ratios for these agents. However, there was also an increase in walk-offs during the pandemic, and 30 home detention walk-offs happened in 2021 versus only 6 in 2022.
Jacob, can I stop? Just quick clarifying question. When you say walk-offs, does that mean absconsions?
Yes, so
Okay.
It could have been accidental, but basically anytime they leave the area they're supposed to be in.
Thank you.
Another, it's slightly related to home detention. The judiciary can assign people to home detention for the department, but they can also assign them to private home detention. And the standards for private home detention monitoring agencies are determined by the Maryland Commission on Correctional Standards. There was a report that was submitted in the past year from the judiciary and DPSES, and that indicated that while there are licensing standards and a variety of reporting standards for these private home detention monitoring agencies, there lacks a regulatory structure for ensuring that the services that they're providing are to the standard of the state, as well as not being sure that reporting of violations is happening in a timely or complete manner. Next, one of these performance measures for the administration is regarding those that have been released from the department on error. There were 2 that were released erroneously in fiscal 2022, up from 0 in 2021, but that was the only time in recorded history that there were no erroneously released offenders. I'll point out that there is a high vacancy rate among commitment record specialists. It was improved last year, but it worsened again in 2022. That's a possible reason why there are more errors. Moving to the budget, there is a fiscal 2023 proposed deficiency related to the Intelligence and Investigative Division. The funding was actually provided in the supplemental budget last year, but some of that money was meant to go to DPSES instead of the Office of Attorney General. This is effectuating that change. But we are asking the department to comment on what the task force is and what their progress has been in setting it up, since this is new. And there is also an addition of positions to accomplish this. Agency spending is broken down in Exhibit 5, and the overall almost $200 million allowance. 3/4 of it goes to the Office of the Secretary and the various large administrative units. The biggest one is the IT division, followed by administrative services, which is the comprehensive finance, fiscal services, and human resources for the department. Some of those special operations, particularly security operations, receive a large amount of money, and that has increased as well. since the department is taking on more contraband interdiction efforts. The overall budget, as I mentioned, is $199 million, an $8.6 million increase. Some of those large changes can be seen in the where it goes chart starting on page 11. There's actually $1.5 million being added for 20 new positions. 17 of those are for the task force that I mentioned previously with the Office of Attorney General. 10 of those are special investigators, and 7 of those are administrative officers and support positions. Moving to the next page, there's some additions for IT. Particularly, there is $2.9 million being added for network and storage systems, mainframes, and the such for the criminal justice information systems. This is the state's centralized information repository for criminal justice records. And it's important to maintain our investment in that infrastructure. And so this is a one-time investment, but is regularly needed in order to refresh the department's systems. There's also a $1 million increase for Do-It services, and they are relying more on Do-It, and those costs have gone up for services for the services they provide. The position changes that I mentioned earlier can be displayed in more detail on page 13, but I will move on to the vacancy discussion, which starting with Exhibit 7, these are the vacancies for the administrative and offices units. They're broken down by the length that the positions have been held vacant. And over half of the vacancies have been vacant for over 12 months. These are most severe in the Division of Capital Construction and Facilities Maintenance, as well as the IT division, the general administration for the Executive Office of the Secretary, as well as the warrant apprehension unit, which had more long-term vacancies. The first issue begins on page 15, and there has been continued issues with hiring the administrative staff for the department, just as there have been issues in hiring correctional officers or other ground level operators. However, these administrative vacancies are some of the worst in the department. There was an improvement in hiring in fiscal 2022. In calendar 2022, there was an improvement in hiring, and there was an improvement in separations as well. So there was a net improvement in the number of administrative employees hired overall. But these do have the highest vacancy rates in the department for any classifications, and those classifications are grouped together in Exhibit 8. Some of these are very, well, all of these are very important for the department's function, but some have particularly high vacancies and are important for services being delivered to their inmates. Particularly 40% of mental health professionals and social workers are vacant. And while some of those are receiving annual salary review increases, it's not the total number. And it's likely that more of these will require attention in hiring. There is also high vacancies among dietary and maintenance staff, 30% vacancies. Some of these general managers and regional managers will receive a 1 grade annual salary review increase. However, most of the positions will not. I will point out that the correctional supply officers are receiving a 1 grade increase, or excuse me, a 2 grade increase among all supply officers, but they actually already have lower vacancy rates than the maintenance and dietary officers. So that's something that seems a little bit uneven or unfair, and it's possibly the case that more annual salary reviews are needed for dietary and maintenance staff. And then finally, I'd like to group together the procurement, program management, and IT professionals. These are highly technical positions that are very important for carrying out projects on a timely manner. A quarter of these positions are vacant, totaling 10 in procurement and 21 in project management and 20 in IT. None of these positions will receive an annual salary review, but it has been something In fiscal 2023, the budget committees did restrict funding to increase hiring in these positions. We are still waiting for 2023 to close out, but we're expecting that that will have an improvement, and the department does have some freedom to use that for salary enhancements. Going a little bit deeper into another category of administrative positions, there's about 30% vacancies among all classes of administrators, office staff, and administrative staff. The entry-level positions among these classifications typically have better vacancy rates, but it seems that they are either not moved up quickly enough or that there are not enough filled positions in the intermediate and advanced stages in order for the department to accomplish its goals. Particularly administrators are higher level civil servants that have levels of responsibility to carrying out specific provisions of statute and the initiatives that the General Assembly is engaging in. So that's something we think should have more attention to, especially the key positions for key projects and programs that we've had specific delays in, such as IT and capital. We're asking the department here to comment on the roles that these positions play and the effect of having these high vacancies. We are, that's the full language there. We are asking for them to comment on this. The second issue overall is major IT projects. Now, there are 6 current projects that the department is working on. 3 of them are either fully implemented or in the middle of implementation, and they are on their way to completion. 3 of them have had to be reworked and are being re-solicited. One of those solicitations has been released, but an award is still awaiting to be approved at the Board of Public Works. But 2 of those will still require a solicitation to be released in the coming months. Exhibit 10 shows a status update on each of these projects. I'll point out that the first project you see there, the Enterprise Resource Planning Implementation Project, is an MCE project, and they actually procured a project manager in 2019, in November of 2019. And since they procured that manager, we saw that project rapidly approach completion, and that is the one project that has been fully implemented. And it was the closest to its actually on time for its completion date. The others have had many delays. Even the Mavis project, which is approaching completion, had some significant vendor issues that they were able to deal with and maintain that contract relationship. But for the Enterprise Resource Planning, for the Electronic Patient Health Record, EPHR, they had some vendor issues they were not able to fix, and they had to terminate that contract. And that's one of the projects with the most significant delays and significant cost increases. Regarding those cost increases, Exhibit 11 displays the total, the expenditures and funding, as well as oversight for all of these projects. The computerized criminal history and the electronic patient health record are not fully funded yet, and they're estimated to require an additional $14.5 million over the next few years in order to bring those projects to completion. We are asking the department here to, or we are recommending actually to implement committee narrative, requesting an update on the status of each of these projects, as well as their steps taken to oversee the progress and minimize the contract risks. Finally, the third issue is contraband levels. As I mentioned, the K-9 contraband unit falls under this administrative division, and contraband levels are still high. Exhibit 12 shows the number of fines that were made by the K-9 contraband unit. And in 2022, there was over a 30% decrease, but the levels are still 6 times higher than they were prior to COVID. Most of those fines are in controlled dangerous substances, and among that, it's mostly for Suboxone film or other types of opiate replacements. Exhibit 13 shows the contraband that was found in total in fiscal 2022. So in the red, you can see the K-9 unit fines, but there's also a majority of fines were made by correctional officers or other staff who directly engage with the inmates. Using this data, there was a 12% increase in contraband fines. in controlled dangerous substance contraband fines. So while it went down for the K-9 unit, it went up for total fines in the department. It's something that we're concerned with, that is a big impact on safety, not only of the inmates, but of the staff who have to engage with them. And it's certainly something that is out of the ordinary for the past history of contraband in the department. Regarding this issue, there's a major IT project, the drone detection program, which is hoping to prevent unmanned flying devices from dropping things onto facility property. And they are also engaging in a $3.5 million mailroom renovation project to bring all of their regional mailrooms to a stage where it'll be easier to prevent contraband from coming into the department. Excuse me. There is a appendix number 2 showing the reporting requirements for private home detention monitoring agencies and an appendix for each of the major IT projects. But now I'll be moving to the recommended actions. The first recommended action is to request a report on the Justice Reinvestment Act. This is annually being asked, and it's very helpful in tracking the progress of JRA. The recidivism report is the second recommended action, and this has also been useful in helping to interpret the recidivism numbers, having the correct context for them, because there are certain things to consider each year. Additionally, the third recommended action is a report on contraband. You just heard why this is a pressing issue. The fourth recommended action is committee narrative on major IT projects, and the final recommended action was mentioned in the overview analysis, and this is committee narrative asking the department to review which categories of service and program statistics could be converted into program participation measures for the department. If there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, but that concludes my presentation. And thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Jacob. Questions just for the audience that watching at home? I know there's many. If senators are up and down, it's because they have other legislative hearings, but they will be back. Jacob, just a quick question on the private home detention issue. Particularly interested in appreciating that there's on the front end of before contract, there are standards, but you mentioned in your analysis that there's very little means for ensuring compliance of the contracts and vendors after someone's awarded. Just, I want to make sure I read that correctly.
Yes, that's correct. So,
okay.
There's certain standards they have to meet in order to qualify to have them assigned to them. But in terms of people auditing or checking that they're doing the work that they say they're doing, there's a lot less regulation on them compared to the state.
Okay, thank you. Okay, with that, Madam Secretary, thank you for your patience, and you can bring whoever you would like from your team up.
Good afternoon again. Madam Chair, members, thank you again. Mr. Cash, thank you for your thorough analysis. As always, we appreciate the ongoing collaboration with you and the Department of Legislative Services. The analysis contains 4 issues for the department to respond to and 5 recommended actions. First, DLS has requested the department brief the committee on the purpose of the Baltimore Organized Crime Enforcement Task Force Strike Force, known as the Strike Force, big name. The Strike Force is a partnership between the U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Maryland and state, federal, and local law enforcement partners, whose mission is to disrupt and dismantle the most violent gangs and drug trafficking organizations in the Baltimore metropolitan area. Strike Force teams have been established based on the national model from the U.S. Department of Justice and are intended to establish permanent multi-agency prosecutor-led teams that conduct intelligence-driven multi-jurisdictional operations against priority targets and their affiliate illicit financial networks. The department received funding from the Office of the Attorney General to fill 15 positions, including 10 DPSCS, Intel and Investigative Division investigators, and 5 contractual DPSCS analyst positions. The second issue the department was asked to comment on was the roles that administrators, office staff, and administrative staff play in the daily operations, as well as the impact of having a third of these positions vacant. Let me begin by stating that the roles of the administrators, the office staff, the administrative staff, and the essential operations are the essential operations of the department. We value all the persons that hold those positions. My predecessors and I have spoken to the committees for the past year about the department's correctional officer vacancies. As demonstrated in other budget hearings, the department continues to focus on retention for correctional officers and has experienced much success. As noted in the analysis, the department has administrative positions that need to be filled. It is important to understand that many of these positions are impacted by years-long hiring freeze, as well as the COVID pandemic. I am pleased to confirm that 212 administrative positions were filled in calendar year 2022. The analysis highlighted vacancies in the Division of Capital Construction and Facilities Maintenance. With the shift of procurement to the Department of General Services several years ago, the Division of Capital Construction positions were transferred to DGS. Although we received some 6 pins to replace positions, the bottom line is that the department's salary for those positions is not competitive with private employers given the level of knowledge and skill required. And I think there's a correction. We only got 2 pins, was it? We gave up 6 and we got 2 back, yes. The Information Technology and Communication Division vacancy faced a similar challenge that has recently been addressed by increasing the range of steps at which a salary offer was made. As such, we have experienced some recent success in filling the ITCD vacancies. I'd like to speak for a minute about the commitment the department exhibited in the department by all staff despite the vacancies. As you see, many of the people that are with me today, Acting Deputy Secretary Harvey, Secretary of Operations, Acting Deputy Secretary Lentz are in acting positions. So those positions cause vacancies in their permanent positions, where she said as commissioner or procurement director. But these staff work hard every day. They are resilient. And I am concerned about their sustainability of having to manage collateral positions and still do the jobs that they were hired to do. Already in calendar year 2023, we've posted 6 classifications of administrative positions to create a master recruitment list that can be used to fill vacancies in multiple division units. The third issue the department was asked to comment on is the updated status of our major ITCD projects, including the computerized criminal history project and electronic patient health record project. A detailed update for each of the major information technology development projects has been provided in my written testimony. However, I have been asked to pay particular attention to the CCH and EPHR projects. I'm able to inform you a solicitation was reissued during Q1 of the current fiscal year for the CCH, and procurement anticipates submitting an award package to the Board of Public Works the Q4 of this year. Regarding EPHR, the department received Board of Public Works approval for a 2-year contract extension with the current vendor in June of 2022. As a result of the contract termination with the previous vendor, the schedule for this project has been reestablished and the timeline is included in the written testimony. The fourth item the department was asked to comment on was the type of systems employed to prevent contraband and the implications of these systems on inmate privacy and property. Again, a detailed explanation is provided in the written testimony. However, the analysis highlighted the recent mailroom renovations. I would like to clarify that the pilot program for the mailroom project has not been implemented, and I am happy to provide a future update. Although the department was not asked to comment on private home detention monitoring agencies, they are included in the budget analysis, and I would like to offer some clarifying information. Private home detention monitoring agencies are private businesses. The private home detention monitoring monitor individuals who are placed in home detention, generally in lieu of incarceration by the courts. The department's Maryland Commission of Correctional Standards licenses and audits these agencies based on COMAR. With regards to the recommended actions, the department concurs with 4 and disagrees with 1. The department disagrees with the request for an additional report on major information technology projects, as the Department of Information Technology is already responsible for both a mid-year and an end-year report. Thus, this would be a duplicate report. With that, my team and I are available for any questions.
Thank you very much, Madam Secretary, and thank you to your team for being here.
Thank you.
Senator Rosepep.
Thank you. I have a lot of questions, so I'll take a breath periodically. And some of them, yeah, and some of them are just my ignorance. What is mandatory release?
Mandatory release is, it's basically an expiration of their sentence. So they have served all the time that the court has said that they are supposed to serve. And based on any additional credits that they receive while incarcerated, subtracted that good time you may be familiar with because they programmed or whatever. Now they come up with a mandatory release date. So you can have a projected release date and a mandatory.
Okay, but maybe I didn't ask a question right.
Okay.
On page 4, maybe this is a question for the analyst. There's a column for mandatory releases and one for expiration of sentence releases. What's the difference between those two?
Because you can have an expiration of sentence where you have been incarcerated the full length of your stay that the judge said you have 5 years.
So mandatory means less than.
And mandatory is less because you've done things while you've been incarcerated that then allow you to have a mandatory release
that
date.
answers my question. I appreciate it. On page 5, again, maybe it's for the analyst. It's talking about recidivism. It says arrests are not included in recidivism, nor is incarceration within local or out-of-state facilities. That seems counterintuitive.
I would need to look further into that for you.
So you mean in terms of our measurement?
In terms of our measurement, yeah. I mean, it sounds like if somebody got arrested or they're incarcerated out of state or in a county jail, there's something going on.
I think that's for the exhibit 1, whereas exhibit 2 doesn't.
I'm sorry, try again.
If I may, Madam Chair, I do have my data analyst here with me, and I think she can provide some clarity, Ms. Angela.
Certainly.
Okay.
So there are 2 recidivism figures before you, Senator. One is the MFR recidivism, which addresses single year return to state responsible custody, so return to the Division of Corrections.
Got it.
The second is the more longitudinal measure, which is the 3-year recidivism, which follows, has some additional measures. You'll see individuals who return for technical revocations or individuals who return, who are given a new sentence to probation. The reason that arrest and local convictions were absent is because that is actually the norm in recidivism calculations amongst other state correctional entities. And part of the JCR requirement indicates that we should look amongst our similarly situated brethren in other states, both in terms of those with similar sizes of correctional populations and those in our immediate area, in order to make a fair comparison against not just the national average recidivism rate published by the National Institute of Corrections, but also coming up with similar measurement styles. The reason that arrest is omitted is because it is not an ultimate proven finding of guilt. And the reason that local is omitted is because it is a rough measure that other states use as well, generally to indicate the difference between misdemeanor and felony, which does not hold in Maryland because we don't have an organized schedule of criminal code.
So does anybody count those? I mean, nobody pays any attention to the folks who are in local custody or folks who are incarcerated or arrested out of state?
Virginia and South Carolina, who you will see referenced within our annual report, do not include non-state responsible sentences. Most state divisions of correction do not include that in their measure. Some states, Pennsylvania, does
Okay,
include arrests, but as a separate measure.
Okay, I'm just making this a note. I mean, I think we ought to be measuring them. I mean, if someone got out of our system and got in trouble, we ought to be measuring that. So we just come back to that issue. I appreciate that.
We'll make a note for discussion.
Keep going.
One more.
That's fine. That's fine. I marked the pages, try to save time here. Page 14 of the report for the analyst. The vacancy rates. Again, I just couldn't follow the math. They were listing vacancy rates for each of these kinds of, each of divisions in the office. But the total for the office of secretary was bigger than all but one of the individual ones. I didn't understand the math.
So this bit shows, so there's, what's missing is the column that shows the total number of allowed positions. But this shows all of the vacancies by length and then the total number of vacancies. So 55% of the office of the secretary's total allowed pins are vacant. That would be 176 total vacancies, and then 96 vacancies have been vacant for over 12 months.
But then how do each of the breakouts of the offices are lower than 55?
Well, these make up the office of the secretary, and then the next group makes up the office of the deputy secretary for operations.
Senator, you're missing the 60% in DCCFM,
But
two
that's-
above, that's
No,
60.
I see the 60%, but that's a very small number. It's only 12.
It's just one of the smallest units.
The senator is asking how we, the math on the
The math,
55%.
I thought this was going to be an average. I thought office of secretary total, that would be an average.
I see what you're saying now. I'll have to double check
Yeah,
that.
it may
but-
just be a math error.
Yeah.
Okay, that's fine. It's not a problem. I make math errors all the time.
Okay.
I'll hand back the microphone for a little while.
Okay, thank you, Senator. Madam Secretary, let's start with perennial question, vacancy rate, and you spoke a little bit about it in your testimony. And the analysis does a great job of breaking down some of the persistence and some of the particular challenge positions here. And we've had this conversation every time. So can you tell us, appreciating you inherited much of the challenge, what do you need moving forward to help you achieve a significantly lower vacancy rate? And particularly if there are positions that you're focused on or divisions you are focused on, we would like to hear that.
So we are going to begin aggressively starting to focus on our administrative positions. As I stated in the past, the focus has been on getting our correctional officer positions up to par. We have been doing a great job there, and we understand the need now to bring in these additional support staff. Because we were in COVID for a couple of years, and we were actually being able to work virtually with some of those support staff, there was less focus there. But now that we are back in the office, we are going to do just what we did with our correctional officers. We're going to have job fairs. We're actually having a job fair on Saturday and in Georgetown, Delaware at the Delaware Technical College, because we have ECI on the Eastern Shore there. We'll be there on Saturday. So we'll have all of our available administrative positions as well as correctional officer positions there. You can actually apply right there and get a conditional offer of employment while you're there. We are anticipating doing more of those events. I've actually had communications with some of the members of City Council in Baltimore City, and we're going to go into their communities, into their recreation centers, and set up opportunities so that their communities can come in and begin to apply right on site, because many of them don't know how to get to our website or don't know how to navigate, but we do have positions that can provide them opportunity as well. So you will see over the next few months an aggressive push towards filling those positions.
We have every confidence in you. I won't say which, but I had a head of an agency in my office earlier today, and we were talking about the challenges of onboarding, particularly with DBM, and in that individual's agency, it was 84 days from start to finish of filling a position. Are you experiencing similar length and time in filling positions?
We have experienced that in the past. We are trying to maintain that within a 45-day window. And that's why we're offering these conditional letters of releases to at least get you on board. Where we're also looking at the contractual positions that we have that we can fill more rapidly. If we get individuals in contractually and then they apply for other jobs within, then it's an easier transfer because that background check has already been completed.
Okay.
And there are other things that have already been done. So we're doing a full overlook at our HR processes so we can make them more smooth and efficient.
We appreciate that. And we've had a couple conversations, not with you here yet, but on DBM's process and perhaps some nips and tucks they can make to ease your burden and the agency level. And perhaps one of them should be, focusing on the persistent vacancies. If vacancy is open for longer than, let's say, 3 months, that we really should be more nimble in our ability to onboard folks in those positions.
Yeah, we appreciate your help.
Okay. Senator Rosebach, back to you.
Thank you. Page 16 of the analysis, exhibit 8, where it has percentages and numbers by occupation. And dietary has the second highest percentage of vacancies, 30%. And the highest number is the way it looks on the chart at like maybe 260. Am I reading that chart right? So I know what the word dietary means, but I don't really know what the jobs are. This is basically cooking.
Most of it is cooking, sir. That is correct.
What is your impression of why we have such huge vacancy there?
I think part of it is because the individual is working behind the walls. So there is a level of integrity that we still need. There is a level of security mindedness that we still need.
Sure.
So when we do background checks on those individuals, because they are part of the correctional officer classification, that series, there are things that eliminate them because of maybe prior arrests that they had, they can't communicate with inmates, conditions of previous releases that they may have that were set forth by the courts. And we run into a lot of that. So that's where the challenge comes in. In some of our more rural areas, I will tell you, because I have gone out and actually tried to solicit some of those individuals to come to us that were working, say, in the Hagerstown area. When I would stop at the store there and hey, how about a job? Yeah. And they like what they're doing already. And the mindset is that it's not safe. And we've got to change that mindset.
No, I can totally understand that. Some of the data suggests it isn't safe.
So yeah, so we have an abundance of challenges, but we are going to continue to push forward.
Is that a pretty long-standing problem, getting folks into the dietary?
I will tell you, it has been for most of my career. I can tell you when I was a warden, we did an aggressive push where we just had a one day where we just had everybody come in to apply for dietary because we were so short on dietary. And this was maybe 2014. So it's been long going.
And what are the minimum credentials or criteria to work in dietary?
It's a high school diploma, but then you have to look at all of the other background things that are.
Okay, I understand that. Well, I'll just raise this on this specific one because we have had, I think we probably still have, I'm not sure, a shortage of folks in dietary in the Prince George's school system. And I talked to the head of all this about it, and she said, she gave the same answer you did, it's a high school diploma. And I said, why do you require a high school diploma? There are lots of people in my district who are very good cooks who do not have high school diplomas. And I think that's another area where we ought to look at.
So that is a DBM standard based on that classification. So
they enforced that on you?
No, well, it's part of the, Christina, am I correct?
Yeah.
It is DBM.
We'll go back.
Yeah, and we'll go back and check because that is one of the things that's identified as one of the requirements for dietary. If you pull it up on our website.
Well, you recall the last governor put forward a policy of looking at all these degree requirements.
We did.
And this, go ahead, I'm sorry.
We removed a lot of the college education requirements as the governor had at that time to look at all of those. I'll have to go back and check the specific one to see what causes the requirement for high school diploma, if it's DBM or department.
Good. I would urge you to look at that, and I'd be happy to talk to DBM about it too, because I mean, this seems like a no-brainer to me.
And I think the other challenge that we have to also recognize is that the grade for that position is one of the lower grades.
What does it pay?
On the classification. I'll have to find that for you. I'll look that up.
All right, thank you. Thank you on that one. Moving quickly here, if I can get to the next page that I marked. Nope, that answers the question itself. Oh, here, it just shows you how little I know about the drug business. Suboxone film.
Suboxone.
What is it? I don't, I sort of get it. Okay, well, I apologize. You're ahead of me.
So, I would say, Earl, did you want? Go ahead.
Suboxone is, I believe, the trade name. It's a buprenorphine film. It's a partial agonist used for opioid treatment. So it's a combination of naltrexone, I believe.
You're going way over my head. I'm not trying to, I mean, if I had it in front of me, what would I be seeing?
That is exactly why it is the challenge that it is for our agency's security. If you had it in front of you on the piece of paper that you are reading the budget on, you could possibly have 50 clear films of it that are intended. It's a transbuccal film. So it's very easy to slide inside between two pieces in a letter, to affix to a photograph. It is particularly because of its very small ease of hiding within other objects that it is such a popular form of contraband to send via mail.
And how recently has it become a problem?
It is, in fact, I believe, one of the chief forms of contraband nationally in all correctional
in
systems.
the past 200 years or in the past 2 years or the past 20 years?
I believe it's only been on the market for the past 50.
So we've had this problem for decades?
I would say that it's certainly something that has risen alongside the prevalence of opioid dependence within our communities. But one important aspect of our contraband interdiction trends is that as other aspects of security in the facility are tightened, as we are doing those perimeter checks, and we saw this especially during the COVID period where visitation was predominantly virtual. You had fewer opportunities to introduce contraband into the facilities, but for the mail. It is a very easy, kind of low personal risk to try and send a letter with something in it. And this is the easiest thing to smuggle in through the mail.
Is it very easy to spot once you got it? Or hard to spot?
It's not.
It is a clear film. But luckily we have very sophisticated forms that do not rely solely on visual identification in order to intercept it. And it's the efficacy of those forms that you see not only resulting in the volume of Suboxone found, but also where we find it. The majority of our CDS finds and many of our contraband finds are intercepted at entry points into the facility within the mail room along perimeter checks. So we find them where you want to see them being found before they get to the inmate population.
I got you. Thank you. Got one, two, I think.
It wouldn't mind, I'm gonna.
Go ahead.
Senator.
Oh, there you go. We see the problem that we have trying to just get people to come to work in this administration. And we know some of the qualifications, but it'd be good maybe to know the most of them are if they're just high school diplomas or other. Because I think it would benefit to find that out and then also maybe get the opportunity to get more people to work for you, work in this department. So I know a lot of them probably just high school diplomas, but you have a lot of administrators and others. So if we can find ways we can help that out, that will be beneficial just for you. I know it will be. So
Thank you.
Madam Secretary, if we can talk about the home supervision a little bit, it's just something that's unfortunately had a pretty negative effect on my district with a horrific crime just a few years back of somebody who absconded and committed a horrific, very public crime. And so it's important to my district. Again, appreciating these are private companies, but there has to be a way that the state can provide greater oversight. You mentioned auditing, if you could speak a little bit about that. And what happens, Jacob did a great job of highlighting one particularly pretty upsetting incident of somebody having been absconding for 5 days without the private entity ever alerting the court system. And I can tell you from experience the horrific impacts that can possibly have on a community. So can we think about, you don't have to have an answer today, but I would really love to explore with you a way that we can hold our private contractors more accountable in this space.
We will look into that.
Okay, I'd love to work with you on that. Thank you. Okay, Senator Rosebutt, back to you.
Thank you. On page 26, it talks about correctional program participation measures. I don't quite understand what correctional program participation means exactly. I mean, what are we measuring exactly?
If you remember from the overview hearing, this was the example that we used was the MCCS audit on the Maryland Correctional Institution for Women. And they showed a number of programs and services that are available, but many of them were closed down and didn't have any participation in them at the time of the audit. And we found out that this is not something that we really report on or look at categorically for all facilities, especially not annually. So it's mostly just to have an annual check on how many people are engaging.
I see. And do we have a list of things that qualify as a program?
So the language refers to the Maryland Commission on Correctional Standards audits, and they look at a number of categories, which have a number of sub programs. Some of those differ based on facility. Not all facilities have all the same available
but there's
programs.
a couple pieces of paper that lay that out.
I can share you.
If you can look for it, whatever there's, I'd like to get a look at what that list is, so we know we're trying to measure here.
Absolutely.
And last but not least, drone detection. I get it. I can picture drones. I know how drones work, and I can see the problem.
So Mr. Earl Anning is our.
I gather he's the drone guy. So what I don't understand is why we haven't done something about it sooner. I guess that's my question. I mean, drones have been around for years.
The program is being implemented now. It was still to be implemented, but we are seeing results from the drone detection program. And we have several investigations that are going on with the drone detection program. So I think it has been implemented in each of the.
It has been.
It has, but it's not fully implemented. It's and it's in the process. So some of the facilities have it, some are being in the process of being installed
And
there.
what are the challenges in doing it? I mean, it seems like it's being done all over the world by like every military in the world and police forces and everybody else. I don't understand it.
I can't tell you the exact reason why it's taken so long. You know, that you want to hear it, the COVID, the supply chain, all those things. We're in the investigative division, we're the customers, we're the users.
Right. Yeah,
so we wanted to,
of course, you
come on board as soon as possible. All I can say is it's a good system. It's really it's really provided us with a number of investigative leads on that,
I'm
and
sure.
it's really needed in terms of
Absolutely.
that. So it's
Okay.
it's a good program.
All right. Well, thank you. I'm glad it's on its way. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Okay, Madam Secretary, we're pivoting to health now, if that's okay. So I'm not sure who on the team can. One is on the status of the medication assisted treatment program. I understand that was a pilot program and might have the implementation or timeline might have been pushed back due to COVID. Can you provide us with any update on that?
So that's twofold. As I think I shared before, we did July 1 of last year, bring in a new substance abuse contract.
Okay.
And that they are in the process of right now evaluating all 17,000 inmates, incarcerated persons, to see what level of care they are needed. If that level of care is the medical assisted treatment, then they will be placed into a housing area that is licensed to do that. Currently, the women's correctional facility in Jessup is licensed for methadone, as well as Baltimore Central Booking and Intake Center is licensed for methadone, and MRDCC. Our partners that work alongside of us with health are in the process of getting our other facilities licensed so they can work in conjunction with this new contract. So we'll have a better array of opportunities to place individuals based on their classification level and their need for treatment.
I appreciate that. Our colleague on Budget and Tax, Senator Hedelman, is very interested in that program. So if you and your staff could perhaps get that in writing to her, that status update, I know she would appreciate that.
Sure.
Okay, and last question is on, we just received some information about the Corizon. I believe that's your contractor for healthcare.
No, Corizon was the old company that
Okay.
was the name was changed to Yes Care.
Okay.
There is still a branch of Corizon
Okay.
that is gone, but we now service, and they did officially change everything to Yes Care.
Yes, Care. Okay. And how is that going? We've gotten some information about other states struggling with that provider, and I just wanted to make sure things are all good in
I
Maryland.
think like any other state, they're having their challenges, especially with staffing. That's a big, you see hospitals are having the same staffing, so they've had to make some adjustments in their staffing areas. I will tell you that they have been innovative in bringing us on a mobile device that allows them to, because of the lack of staff, get around to other facilities and utilize that same staff for things that would be normally inmates sent out to clinics for.
Okay.
And in the first couple of weeks of them implementing that mobile device, we saved about 20 trips to the hospital. That means we didn't have to transport those inmates. So that was a plus for us. So we continue to work aside with them because we understand the challenges that they have. But we have a good partnership right now.
So they're utilizing more telehealth services, is it?
They are using
Okay.
telehealth services. They are still trying to onboard additional staff that they need so that they can rev up their staffing levels, just like everybody else's is. But I work very closely with their regional vice president.
Okay.
And I can pick up the phone and call her whenever I need and say there's a problem, and she's right on it.
Okay. Thank you very much. And seeing no other questions, any closing thoughts for us? I think you're in front of the subcommittee one more time at least, so this is not goodbye.
Yes, no, thank you very
Okay.
much. I appreciate your time.
Okay, thank you very much to you and your team for all you do.
Thank you.
And 2/4 of the committee, we are back in this room tomorrow. As soon as we adjourn on the floor, hearing 3 budgets. We have MDOT, State Highway Administration, Department of Environment, and MDOT MTA. So it'll be another great Friday and PSTE. Thank you all very much.
Have a good